Okay, everyone, we are back for part two of laser engraving on slate. Now, as you can see, there is a big change. I actually shot that video quite a few months ago, had it edited, had a bunch of parts shot for the second part. Unfortunately, lost some of the video when one of my hard drives died. So we are reshooting that. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to have all the big pieces of slate. But the big thing here is to talk about the different things that you're going to need to do and utilize to do either small orders or large orders, and also to get the effects you want on your slate. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump on into some of the pieces you're going to need. All right, first of all, as we showed in the last video, you have now gotten your big batch ready, or maybe just a few pieces ready for your slate engraving, and they're going to be finished with your lacquer of choice, or whatever your finish is. I have seen people actually using now mineral oil on them, other types of finishes. Kind of gives a little bit different looks, whether it's not as shiny and more matte or more wet. But the big point is you want to do it before you laser engrave it, so that way you get that nice bright pop out of it. If you do decide to go back and reseal it again, just understand that everything is going to get toned back down and not be as bright and shiny. Now, when we look at the pieces, you can see in the slate of kind of what I call the stone's grain. It's really not grain, it's just kind of the way the stone is formed, and it kind of has a flow to it. And when you're doing these engravings, you're going to want to make sure that that is facing up and that your laser engraving is going across it. It's not the hugest thing. I just took this from my wood engraving, and it seems to work really well with the slate, just as well it would with wood grain. Depending on the machine you have, you're going to want to be able to do repeatable engravings in the same location. For instance, if you look to my right, you can see the F2 here, and right now I have it set up in the slide extension model, and that allows me to actually put multiple pieces of slate all touching each other, and then pinpoint position them with the framing and also the camera. However, if I'm only doing a few at a time, you can purchase something like this, or make it if you have a 3D printer. That way, every time you get it in the perfect position, and all the coasters are going to look as uniform as possible. Over on my S1, I actually took some MDF. I believe this is 2 pieces of 1/4 inch that I cut, and I actually made myself a jig. Now, to make something like this on like your S1 or even your P3 or one of your bigger engravers with a bigger bed space, easiest way to do it is, you know, get your piece of wood. This is, like I said, I believe it's 1/4 or 1/8 of an inch. Place it in there, get a diagram set up with the correct measurements for your piece of slate you're trying to fit. Typically, these are right around 3.5, 4 inches. That's what I cut them out to be. And then that way you cut it and make sure you mark it this side up or however you want to. So that way, when you put it back in your machine, everything is squared up. The biggest goal here is we want whatever we're using for the jig to be square with the laser. Otherwise, when it tracks across this, instead of it following perfectly down the center line, it's going to come at an angle, and then everything's going to get thrown off, and you're going to be having to individually place every item. Another note on that is when you do create the file to make a jig like this, whether it's using a big one like this or a smaller one, you're going to want to save that file and lock everything in place and keep that as your jig file. That way, when you go to work on a new project, you can actually import that in to your project and use that to pre-position everything and just turn it off so that way it doesn't engrave or cut. One of the things that I did with this one for my coasters or all my other jigs, I save that file. And one thing that I will mention of note you should do is put a couple crosshairs. They're pretty faded out on this because of all the laser engraving that's gone over the top of it. That way, when you do pre-position it back in, you can check squareness by dragging your aiming laser from square to, or from crosshair to crosshair and lining it up. That way you know it's in there square. All right, so now we have talked about the materials you're going to need. They're already prepped and ready. They have had their lacquer coat put on. You have created your jigs or figured out how you're going to place them in your laser engraver to do your consistent, same repetitive engravings. One other key factor you're going to need to know is the thickness of your slate. Now, when you buy these guys from your source, you will notice that they'll all be pretty similar, but there might be some slight differences when it comes to width and height, but also thickness. The biggest thing when it comes to the thickness is that's going to set your focal height when it comes to engraving. Too low of a focal point, as in below the surface, and it's going to try to do a deeper engrave, which actually might cause some issues like bubbling or causing it to be almost removing too much material. Too high up, you lose a lot of your fine detail and also get a wider beam of laser engraving on it done where it's just not, it's going to look blurry. What I have found out through the multiple coasters I've done, about 2 to 3 millimeters is okay for a variance between the two. And for my S1, for example, it measures the height from the, where it sits at normally down to where it touches. If it goes higher, that means it's lower. If it goes lower, that means it's closer to the laser itself. So for me, if it says it has to drop 23 millimeters to one coaster, and then I move it to another coaster and it drops down to 27, and then another coaster goes to 25, I know that if I set the height for my focal distance to 25, I'm within that 2 to 3 millimeter mark. If you want to get really technical, especially if you're doing these as batch engravings, I will actually use a measuring device that you can get for joiners and whatnot. And basically what it's doing is measuring the height from the flatness of the measurer to the height of the object you're measuring. And I will actually sit there on a table and measure every individual one out and batch them into their categories. That way I know which one is the shortest and which one is the tallest. And when I go to engrave them, I can keep them in those batches so that everything really turns out well. Or if, let's say, I have 4 of 23 millimeter left over and let's say 4 of 25 millimeter left over, I know I can engrave those together. Now that we've gotten the setup portion done, let's go ahead and move over to the computer and show you the first test you need to do before you start running all of your slate through your machine. Okay, so we're over here on XTool Studio and we are going to be doing our test engrave. And this is going to be very important on trying to figure out what kind of coloration we want for our slate, or if we're going to be trying to do something like one of the slate engraves that I've done before, where it's like a picture and you get multiple varying colors. The first thing we're going to want to do is create an object. I just typically go with a square. We're going to click it off. We're going to make sure we go to engrave. For XTool Studio users, Lightburn, I don't really have a best solution for it. I know that they have a material test array you can do with them. So if you're familiar with that software, you can do it the best way you can there. But this is going to be specific to XTool Studio. If you're using XTool Studio, the first thing you're going to do is go ahead and change the unknown material to rock. And I believe it comes up as square rock coaster or rock. Both of those work. And it'll have an apply button that will then give you XTool's common settings for the laser engraver. From here, if you look over to the right, you will see that it's saying 60% power, 600 speed, 1 pass, 200 lines per centimeter. I typically start with these settings, but I'll set the test array to expand outwards in both directions on power and speed, and then I will start working on lines per centimeter or dwell settings. So for this, we have a power of 60, speed of 600, lines per centimeter is 200. We will go ahead and move over to the left, and under the applications button, we will click it, and there is a material test array. We click on that, and this is where we can set up our test array. Now, I will typically use multiple coasters. You could just use one coaster and do multiple settings, but because I like to try to get as many potentials on one piece and then either sand it down later and redo it, or grab a new piece and try it with a different setting, I'll just do it on the one coaster. and I will add in as many rows and columns as possible to get that test array. So we will set this from 100 power max, probably down to about 30. We might get some engraving lower than that, but a lot of that can be changed with the speed. Speed is set at 600. We will go up to, we'll call it 1200. We'll just double that number, and then we will have it down to 300. Now we will increase our columns and rows to 10 and click done. And now, as you can see, we have a nice big test grid that we can put on the center of this piece of slate. Now, I will say in XTool Studio, I wish they would give us, and if XTool you watch this video, if you could add the option in to change the headings for the power and speed, that would be great, or being able to add in additional lines. Otherwise, what you need to do is select the item, ungroup it, go up to the title, and what I like to do is include F2 200 LPC. That way you know it's going at 200 lines per centimeter. That way you can make another one of these at 100 lines per centimeter. This is actually very easy to change all of them to 100 lines per centimeter or increasing lines per centimeter. It is very hard to change every individual setting though for power and having to adjust everything. Once we have done that, we can regroup everything so that everything stays together. Hit our autofocus. It will take our picture of our image. Make sure we're centered someplace where we like it. I think that looks pretty good right there. And then send it over to the machine. Okay, and there you have it. It has been completed and we have got our test engrave. And just looking at this right off the bat, we have lots of great white and light colors down in here. Up here is where we start actually having more of our discoloration. It's still staying kind of a slatish color. If I was going to be choosing something to do a single color engrave on, meaning a logo or something that doesn't need to have that picture quality to it, which I'll just show you in a second, I would be probably choosing something like this one right here. It has a really good uniform look. 500 at 62 power. If we would like, we could actually use that as our next test engraving setting, and we would then run it with a variation of maybe half the power, half the speed, double the power, double the speed. That way we get our next test grid to really kind of formulate what is going to be best. But that one right there, to my eye, looks the best. Now, if we're trying to do like picture engraving where we want variation in color, what we want to do is look to where the power is just white, and if you go either faster speed or lower power, it gets slightly darker. And if you look right in here, you can see that this color and this color are slightly different. I would take this one right here, do a new test engrave on it, and figure out if there's a little bit better setting, maybe 35 power, maybe 34 power, and that would be your setting to be able to do picture engraving. Let me go ahead and show you that. So the difference that I'm talking about here versus picture or logo or single color engraving is this right here. As you can see, this is all one uniform color. It doesn't need to be multi-layered or multicolored because it's just like a pencil drawing or chalk drawing. That is where that higher setting would work really well because everything's going to come out nice and crisp. Now, if you're trying to get something like this, where you have it being like a black and white photo, that is where that lower power setting and really doing the management on it, so that way you get the perfect setting to get that color variation on power and speed is going to be very important. Okay, so now that we've done our test engrave, and mind you, if I was doing this, I'd probably do a few more test engraves just to fine tune those numbers out. You can get as crazy as you want with it, whether it's adding lines per centimeter, dwell times, power, speed, whatever. You can even, if you have an IR, try IR. IR actually gets some really cool results with some different coloration in it. And really the sky's the limit. But the big important part is test all the different things out. Use that slate, those extra pieces to really dial everything in. What we're going to do now is I'm going to use that piece that we just tested on, and I'm just going to go ahead and send through a color image that I'm going to set to the slate, and I'm going to show you guys how you need to invert your image so that way it will come out better on your slate. Okay, and we are back. A little bit new setup for you guys. I am going to be trying the actual screen record through one of the studio applications that I got. So hopefully everything sounds good and it looks good. But let's go ahead and get into what we're doing next. Now, like I said, when we're doing the slate engraving, there are some tips and tricks to it. First of all, we're going to go ahead and look at engraving the simple thing, which would be not this picture, but just a simple SVG image. So if you come over on the left on XTool Studio, there'll be an elements page. And all of these pictures in here, except for one category, are going to be SVGs. And that's when you're going to want to be able to choose that solid color. You can do some two-toning in it, and the way you would do that would be something like, let's say, this flower. So we would go to our reference, we would find the color that we liked, which probably is the 60 by 600, and place it how we want, put some text on there, and let it rip, and we'll get our light-colored engraving. Now, let's say we did have some color variations. Maybe something like, I don't know, kind of a very light white and then almost a goldy hue because we figured out the right settings for it. What you could do in here, and with a lot of SVGs, XTool Studio, you just go to the ungroup section, and now each one of these petals is now become changeable. So you can click on this one and set it to your setting for gold, and then maybe this one and this one and this one, and maybe you have one that kind of comes out more of a blue tone. Maybe you do the center. You can then set all those settings for those individual little SVG files or drawing parameters, highlight it, group it, and send it through, and then you'll get that kind of return on your piece of slate. The big one I think everyone wants to know about, though, is how to do picture engraving. Anytime you're going to take an image that's a picture, because we're working on a black surface or a dark colored surface, needs to be inverted in the colors. So let me go ahead and get the new piece of slate in and kind of show you what I'm. So as this goes ahead and loads in the new picture, what we're going to see is there is a dark background. If you look at the top right, you already have your square rock coaster selected. And on the far left, you have all your elements. In the middle, at the top, when you highlight and click this picture image, it'll say edit. And if you click edit, now you have all these cool options to go through between cropping, cutting out, expanding images, enhancing it. Enhancing does help some images. Sometimes it doesn't do the best job. One of my favorite features, though, that it'll do is the filtering, but also the restyling. And the reason why I like the restyling, as you can see here on the left, is that on a super detailed image like this, you can change it to a line art or maybe a black and white drawing, just different styles. And depending on what you're making, it might actually enhance the photo more. So just for fun, I kind of like how this flat illustration looks and also this black and white. I think we're going to go with the black and white. We're going to generate it. It does cost the credits, which you earn one of, I believe, 3 ways now. It might be 4. When you purchase your machine, you get points. When you go into XTool Studio, you can buy these credits, and I think they're kind of like $1 a credit. I can't remember. No, I think it's 100 credits for $1. And the third way is if you go into the Atom software and upload and do reviews and other things, you can earn X amount of credits per review, per upload that you do. So let's go ahead and do this black and white. We'll generate it. Typically, it's going to replace the image. I probably should have just made a copy of it, but I can always open this up again. And it's going to change us to a black and white. And this is kind of where it's important to understand how your image turns out. So as you can see, it looks okay. I actually like it the other way. We're going to work with that. You can always change it. There's a section where you can do other things with it, but let's go ahead and stay with this. Let's say someone had a picture of a dog, a pet, whatever, a family member. They want it put on the piece of slate. Maybe you're doing a bigger engraving. What we're going to want to do is actually come up to this edit button and go to adjustments. You can hit auto adjust. When we're working on a dark scale stone like slate, Anything black is going to engrave at full power. Anything white is going to engrave at the lowest power, meaning basically no power at all. On an image like this, what you would get is basically a washed out picture with only a few areas like down here and over here not being engraved. And that wouldn't represent your image very well because you want this to be white and the rest of this to be tones of shades of gray or gray to white. So the way you're going to do this is if you hit auto adjust, which I do like, it works pretty well, but it gives me a negative. It inverts it. It gives it a negative so that it will engrave that way. I will tell you, there are certain things you can do in XTool Studio, but there are also programs out there such as ImageR, which will also help you enhance your photo for free. There is a paid version. The free version works fine. But also you can do that in XTool Studio. So what I like to do is let it auto adjust it to where I want. I will click the grayscale button. That way it adds this grayscale tab in there. And now what we can do is zoom in on it a little bit and we can adjust all this, right? We can kind of clean this up. And the way we're going to do that is we can adjust the strength. And if you increase the strength, it's going to lighten it up a little bit more or darken it. We can change the grayscale. We can drop the right side down. It's going to make it whiter, meaning there's going to be more dark stone showing through. And what you really want to have is a good contrast between the lights and the darks. You don't want anything getting too blurry or muddled when you're doing this. Sharpness is a tricky one. Sometimes increasing it max does help. You can see it's fine-tuned it out quite a bit more. If you do it the opposite direction on this picture, it's going to make it more blurry. But depending on what you're trying to achieve, because you see all these lines through here, a more blurry image might actually work better like this. All those little lines are starting to kind of go away, but we're getting a better image and representation of the actual centerpiece, the fox. Brightness and saturation will do different things. Saturation, I have really never noticed it do too much to the image. I've maxed it. I've minimized it. I don't see any difference to the image. I know for color it would be. Brightness, though, is going to make your whites and darks brighter. It's going to look overexposed. Sometimes this can help bring out some of those details and get less, and get that contrast you're looking for. Contrast, exactly what we're looking for, contrast. Increasing it too much will make the darks not come through or the black levels come through. That can be an issue. And it overall adjusts the contrast for the whole image. I would say most of the time I spend the majority of my adjustments between strength, grayscale, and then brightness and contrast. Temperature is going to be your coloration from red to white to blue. We just typically leave this right smack dab in the middle because we're not doing any color engraving. And then same thing with the tint. It's gonna give it some tinting. Again, on a color photo, you would be able to notice it more. But I actually like how that looks right there. We're going to go ahead and run it through and see how it goes. Okay, so I forgot about this part. When you're doing the SVG versus a PNG or JPEG file, there is a significant change, and that's between lines per centimeter, which you can see on this one if you look to the right. You have a power, a speed, and a lines per centimeter. When you go to the JPEG with the F2, now this isn't as necessary on the S1 or maybe the P3, but on the F2, you go to DPI, power, and dot duration. And dot duration is how long the time spent at each point. So it's a dwell setting is what you'll hear on other laser machines. It is one of those things that you're going to have to probably do a test setting with this and figure out what's going to work best. So always have that extra slate available. Be prepared for testing. You could probably go into ChatGPT or something like that, which we will do, and see, hey, what does a speed of this many milliseconds equal into a dot duration at this DPI? So again, AIs, ChatGPT, other ones. That's where you can at least maybe not get the perfect setting, but really focus it into that setting and then do your testing from there. You can convert images to SVGs. I haven't had the most success with them engraving correctly, just because of the way SVGs are typically set up. They do multicolors. For any type of picture, I just like to use a JPEG, a PNG file, something that's very high resolution. So what we're going to do is stop real quick, and I'm going to get those numbers from ChatGPT. Okay, here we go. And we are back. We are back to the JPEG image. So after doing some conversions, one thing to make note of, that the dwell time is microseconds. So this would be 0.125 milliseconds. They don't have the point in there. It's just how they run it. So you go from anywhere from 10 to 3,000 microseconds. DPI came out to be 508. Now, another thing that you're left to look at is your bitmap mode. Bitmap is basically, they'll call it raster for it, or how it's going to dither, not raster, dither. And that's just the way it kind of puts all the colors together to make it look. Again, this is one of those things that if you have a big piece of slate, run a couple different images on it once you have your settings dialed in when it comes to the grayscaling for it, and see how it changes. They do have an actual preview option in here, but depending on the material you're working with and settings, it may not actually apply it to the rock. We'll see if this does. Typically, I've found the most success with either Jarvis or Atkinson. There are people that say Grayscale works. Floyd and Stuckey I've used occasionally, but typically on glass. But we're going to go with Atkinson. So one of the things that you might want to do beforehand is click on this material setting until you have one that actually has the preview available. That does kind of help just give you an idea. It's not always 100% perfect, but it does at least give you an idea. Now that we have this all set up, we're going to go ahead and position it, make sure everything's lined up as best we can. I'm not looking for the most perfect one here. This is kind of a test for you and I together. Make sure we're autofocused in. And while this runs, I'm going to go over one more piece that we talked about, which is ImageR for enhancing your photos. Okay, here we are at ImageR. ImageR is basically a picture enhancer. People will say to go ahead and run this and use this to go through pictures before you upload them. So the first thing you're going to want to do is upload an image, which you can just drag it in the photo editor or click the button down here. We're going to go ahead and say colored, because I like to do the grayscale changing actually in XTool Studio just to make sure everything flows correctly. We're going to go ahead and do the same picture that I just had, just to see how much it can actually enhance it. And it's going to take a second to upload, especially out here. I'm on Wi-Fi. It's not the best connection. And so there you have it. There is your picture. Everything's lined up on it. The first thing they're going to let you do is crop it. One of the cool things about this is you can adjust it and crop it. You can do it in XTool Studio. I feel this might be a little bit easier at times. You can crop it just a little bit more accurately, I guess. Like right there, we have a nice square. Now we could use that for a square coaster really nicely. We have our crop there. Now we have our cropped image. We can resize it. Resizing it's going to allow us to change basically how many pixels are on it, increase the quality of it for your DPI, depending on what you look at. Typically 500 DPI is a good setting because you can match it to your laser engraver, whatever your DPI is. Remember, XTool typically runs on certain machines in LPC, not DPI. Okay, so there is our images side by side. Again, this program is slow even on when I'm on Direct Connect. It is a freeware over the internet. You can download it and it does speed it up. I just found that the program, like I said, was a little bit cumbersome to try to use. And this is where you can make a lot of different changes on it. But you can see it has already kind of cleaned up the image slightly. From here, now we can do things like add text, material, and then download it, or we can start working on the adjustments for it. So they do have an invert feature. We don't need to invert it. We're going to do it in XTool Studio. Levels are going to be your black and white scale. Auto adjustment, it just automatically adjusts the picture to make it look better. Color correction, it's going to automatically make it look better. Gamma adjustment's going to be that brightness scale. Contrast is going to be the difference between lights and darks. Brightness, obviously making everything brighter or darker. Denoise is going to make it so it's not as many little pieces there and make it a little bit simpler. And then sharpen. I would say typically what I did here is usually hit the automatic process method 1. They do have some descriptions online to be able to look on it at, but we'll just try this, see what happens, and give it a second. Okay, and that took about 3 or 5 minutes to actually redo the image. It looks a little better. I can't really notice it on my screen. It looks like the right one just has been cleaned up slightly. At this point, you can mess around with it, adjust it however you want. You can actually add the material, which is kind of cool. I'll put black slate in there. Hit OK. It'll do the same thing. It'll take a little while to adjust to it. Okay, and after a couple more minutes, we finally got this enhanced. And as you can see, it actually looks very decent. You're looking at an image that has a lot of color variation. The eyes are coming through. And this is where image art can really shine when it comes to prepping your photos for the engraver. A little bit of a side note and tidbit, when you load this into XTool Studio, don't mess with any of the other settings unless you're really trying to like bring up the lights or the darks just a little bit more. It's gonna change some things on it anyways, but you want to try to leave it as real as possible or as natural as possible to this settings. Once you're done here, all you got to do is go ahead and click the download button, which I don't remember where that's at. There it is, download right there. And now you can download it as 3 different files. I would typically do a PNG or a JPEG. We'll do a PNG, and it has started the download up here. Okay, and so now we are back over on the XTool Studio, and we finished that task. That coaster took about 6 minutes to do. Let's go ahead and see how this picture compares to the one from ImageR.
So as you can see here, we are going to be pulling it in. Make sure to hit that scale to fit button so you're not dealing with a giant picture. And what you can see here is that there's 2 different thought processes on it. The XTool one is more like a negative, while the ImageR is more like a line art. Either one can be used well. It just depends on what you're trying to look for. I still prefer the one on the left as the negative, so we're going to go with that one.
Okay, so I want to first off go ahead and say thank you guys for, following the channel, also joining in and watching this video. I know it's kind of a longer one, but there's a lot of details to go over with engraving when it comes to all the power settings and tips and tricks and things that you can do on it. It's one of those things that really it's trial by error for most of the time. Every laser engraver is a little different. My 40 watt is different to another person's 40 watt. Theirs could be putting out 40.1 or 40.5 or 38 point something. Life, lens, how dirty it is, the actual adjustment in height. There are so many different things that can create differences in engravings. So the biggest thing I'm going to let you guys know is go into your shop, get a bunch of stuff that you can test engrave on. I don't care if you just have to buy a pack of it. I'll go ahead and link in the description where I typically get my slate from when it comes to off of Amazon. But go and test, create, figure it out. If it doesn't look right, you can always adjust your settings to try to get it a little bit better. Remember, with laser engraving, outside of the dwell time, but it does factor into it, it's power and speed. The slower and less power, the darker but not as deep of an engrave you're going to get. But the higher the power, the deeper the engrave, but the faster you go, the lighter it's going to get or less deep it's going to get. It's always some varying function on those. And I can tell you from experience, doing the halving rule works a good amount of the time. If I'm running 50% power at 500 millimeters a second and you get a very faint line and you switch it down to 25% power and 250 speed, it would give you the same line. It doesn't. A lot of times it doesn't. So really the big thing I can say is get out there in the shop, start doing testing, test different materials. I have thrown so many materials away over the last couple months just because I had so much of a collection of it that I started writing all these numbers down. And that is another thing I would say. make sure you store these not just in whatever program you're using, but also in a hard book. I have this guy right here. This is my kind of ideas, thoughts, and whatnot, and I need to write in it more often. But this is where I typically will put my laser engraving settings for the different materials. And I'll even write down the specific material if I need to. If it's a specific type of cut from a certain place and I had to really fine tune my settings to just work on that tumbler versus all tumblers, I'll add it in this book. I did do the coaster twice, and I'm going to show you the results from just doing those few edits that we did in the end of XTool Studio. So this is how the Fox turned out the first time. It's kind of muddled. I thought to myself, hey, you know what? If I drop that DPI down, because that image, when I did run it through ImageR, said it was 72 DPI, which would make it very sparse on this, let's go ahead and just decrease it from 500 DPI down to, I think I put it to about 300. Just changing that one setting, that's what you got. To me, for a picture engraving on slate, this is by far absolutely acceptable. Could you make it better? Absolutely. If you sanded it, it'd look even better. If you fine-tuned all those settings and the dwell times and everything and just got it just dialed in, it'd be perfect. And that's where what you'll see a lot of guys do is take a slate coaster like this and run 4 images on it, make this smaller, and just change those settings just to see what it's going to come out to be. So anyways, again, thank you guys for following me along on this journey. I do appreciate all the support. And if you do get a chance, please hit that like, subscribe, and notification button. I'll see you on the next one.